My name is Bhavik. I'm an investor here at Bessemer. And today we're going to be diving into how AI is reshaping modern design workflows. And specifically, we're going to focus on vibe coding and the rise of this hybrid role of the design engineer. Um, we're joined by Cedric Ith, who leads design and product at an exciting Bessemer portfolio company, Perceptron. Maybe Cedric, I'll pass it over to you. Can you briefly introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about what you're working on now and what types of design problems you're the most excited about.
Hey. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Bhavik. Hello, everyone. I'm Cedric Ith. As Bhavik said, I lead products and design at Perceptron. A bit about my background, I've been working pretty much my whole career in the emerging tech space across various fields. I got my start at Microsoft working on the HoloLens and mixed reality. I then went to a healthcare startup based in SF, where I was working on self-serve microclinics that you could do body scans, heart scans, and blood draws. And then I took my time over to Coinbase, where I worked in crypto and worked on their consumer staking product. And that brings me now to Perceptron, where here we're working on building physical AGI, and we're starting to develop out the foundation models for physical perception. So think image, video input, and the ability to segment out various contextual intake from there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Cedric. And so AI is very much impacting our day-to-day. We're feeling it in the venture ecosystem. And I know for a lot of us, many of us had these like aha moments of when we noticed, at least in the last 3 to 5 years, that AI was going to dramatically impact not just our day-to-day lives, but our careers. For me, that was probably ChatGPT, of course, and then also seeing the rise of a couple early portfolio companies here at Bessemer that just drove tremendous transformation with AI. And I'm curious, Cedric, for you, like what in your last 3 to 5 years was the aha moment when you realized AI was going to dramatically transform the design workflow?
Definitely. For me, I was starting to hear about, of course, I had my ChatGPT moment as well personally when I first spun that up back in 2021. And I was really blown away by its capabilities. And going from there, I hadn't really been able to integrate AI into my day-to-day workflow. I was at bigger companies and that had established code bases and norms where maybe I couldn't directly work on the code base myself. And I never really got to dive in until I joined Perceptron, actually. Here, it's just a 10-person company where we're small but nimble. And so because of the ownership, I really just tried to dive deep and really lean into adopting these new tools and learning as much as I could. And so that's when I started to play around with tools like Lovable, V0, and even Cursor. And so a bit about my background kind of education, I studied a mixture of front-end coding as well as design back at the University of Washington in a degree called informatics. And so this gave me a bit of a technical foundation where I was at the start of my college, I was learning how to build websites from scratch, just vanilla HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, and starting to learn more frameworks like React and whatnot. And I had this high level foundation. And of course, as I started to move towards design, I wasn't touching code as much, but I understood the high level concepts of how the DOM worked and different state management. And when I was at Perceptron, I was playing around with V0 and I was starting to learn and try to build out prototypes that I really wasn't able to achieve the experience in Figma. For folks who use Figma and the prototyping functionality within Figma, I think it can get you quite a ways with standard interactions with like dissolve animations and whatnot. But the minute you start to try to do anything dynamic where you're creating new assets from scratch, or you're trying to capture like coordinates, it starts to become really difficult. And so this is where typically you'd have to go into a prototyping tool. There's been Framer back when it was a mobile prototyping tool, and there it was the closest mixture between like design and coding. But V0 has really been a chance for me to just use natural language prompting that I had been doing with ChatGPT and see how I was able to start spinning up prototypes and showing experiences in a matter of hours, things that would take me days, even weeks to onboard into a new tool set and learn how to implement myself. And that was really the moment where I was like, okay, this is like a step function change in my productivity as a designer, and my ability to convey concepts and experiences that go beyond the standard capabilities of Figma.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been awesome just seeing you execute and rapidly prototype with these tools at Perceptron. Maybe with that, we can dive in. Cedric, I don't know if you want to share your screen, and maybe just walk us through your flow, and we'll ask questions as you go along.
Yep, sounds great. Let me share my screen. Can you all see this?
Yep.
Wonderful. So I'm gonna take you all through hopefully the end-to-end flow of how I start with design, take it through prototyping in V0, and then bringing that code and prototype into Cursor and do the last final polish touches within Cursor myself. Um, so typically I'll start my process in Figma just the same as everyone else. I have a new feature idea. And so, for example, I have this feature idea where I'd like to draw bounding boxes over images. At Perceptron, we're going to be doing a lot of this as we break down images and videos. And so the ability to annotate these is going to be an important part of our experience. And so the start of this is that you would have some sort of image and a place to type some text. And as you click into the image, it would show an overlay. Um, and here you can go into segment mode at the bottom left, where it would then trigger these crosshairs over your cursor. And as you drag and drop, it would then create new bounding boxes. High level, this kind of makes sense. I'm able to convey a bit about like how the overall experience would work for this feature. But if I really wanted to actually play around and get a feel for what does it actually feel like to draw multiple bounding boxes? What are edge cases where bounding boxes are overlapping with each other? What if I need to test this on many different image types, and I wanna run through a whole gambit of different user scenarios? It's going to be a lot of work to have to mock this out and duplicate this flow across all these different scenarios. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these designs and I'm going to start to port them into V0.
And Cedric, did you
Yeah.
did you use AI at all in generating the mockups in the first place? Like any generative image tools, or does Figma have a native AI tool that you used?
For these designs, I didn't do any AI generation, but Figma does have some native AI generation tools. Some that I actually find myself using pretty often are I'll be doing remove background for certain images I need to do cropping for if I'm doing more kind of graphic design. Make an image is also really powerful. I'd say it's on par with Dolly and other image gen tools. Um, and then their add interactions, I'm bullish on this. I think right now it still needs a bit of hand-holding, but I think as they start to develop out the add interactions flow, it makes for like auto prototyping a set of 10, 20 screens. It makes it much quicker and you save a lot of time that way.
Thanks.
Awesome. So again, the purpose of going into V0 here, and the way that I think about it is Figma, I'm using Figma to still show like what is the polished, most high fidelity design and what does that actually look like. And I'll use that as a guiding post. And for V0, I'm trying to showcase interactions that I can't achieve with Figma. And for example, I'll just show, if I were to try and prototype this in Figma today, and I go over to my prototyping tool, okay, I can get some basic hover animations and states and whatnot. And I could even click to show an image overlay here. This is pretty standard. This comes with Figma's prototyping tools. That's great. But the minute I want to start to get into the meat of this experience and I click segment mode, now I'm facing that limitation, right? I can't get these crosshairs to follow my cursor. I can't get these bounding boxes to auto add the tinting to the background. And then definitely I can't generate these labels dynamically as I create more and more bounding boxes. So this is where you start to see the delta between where Figma stops being able to achieve what I'm trying to do, and I had to move to V0. So what I'll do is I'll take this screen here. This really is just a simplified version of the screen above, where um, it's a starting point for me to upload an image, and essentially establishing like a basic layout for V0 to get to know and use as a launching point. So I'm going to export this, go to desktop, save. Okay, now I'm in V0 here. So I'm going to start completely from scratch. Here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go straight to their import Figma. What I can do then is copy the link to the section. And then I already have Figma hooked up, so my account is hooked up. And when I drop this frame link, it can read through my my Figma documentation and actually grab this specific frame. So that looks right. This is the right frame. I'm going to hit confirm. And now it's going to do some thinking. Again, I'm just trying to establish what is the overall structure and layout. So it gives us a kind of a launching point. And from here, I'm going to start to use prompting to do any high-level functionality, styling, and adding logic to this.
And how
Yeah.
long has this been possible? Like, how long has it been since you were able to pull in Figma into V0 and start to go 0 to 1 here?
I first started doing this back in March. So only a couple months, really.
And is it just that the integrations weren't there until recently, or the code generation became better? What came together to make this possible?
Yeah, I think previously these code gen tools have been mostly text input based. And I think they started to see a need in the market where people were trying to do a similar flow going from high fidelity mockups and putting them into tools like Lovable and V0. And I think import Figma just made sense for these companies to implement. I believe V0 was one of the first companies to do this. And so since then, I think it's shown that it's pretty capable, and it can actually start to pull together pretty powerful mockups. So, also this is all live, so as we're gonna go with the flow here, and see how we do. So let's see how V0 did on this zero shot. It looks like it has the image upload. So I'm gonna try to just upload this image of some pigeons here and see what it does. Okay, so I think the image uploading isn't working at the moment. What we can do here is start to give it some prompting. So um, when I upload an image, show it on a canvas, on a full screen canvas, where I can start to draw bounding boxes over the image. So we'll see how it does here. I think what I find is V0, you have to give it some of the high level structure first, and then you explain the overall information architecture where you give it the different steps of the user experience, and then it can start to compartmentalize different modes for the prototype to switch and toggle to and from.
Do you always recommend starting from a Figma, or do, do you sometimes just enter text directly?
I also just enter text directly too. I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve. Figma can help where if you have a specific layout that you're trying to um, work off of, you don't have to specify that as part of your first message. But if you're not as opinionated about that at the start, then it usually works pretty well. All right, great. So I'm able to upload an image here and then start to draw some bounding boxes. So we've got I think V0 is doing a lot of work here, and it's starting to make some assumptions around how to manifest this experience. Um, so it gave me this top toolbar up here where it's tracking the total number of bounding boxes, an export button, a close button, which I think, yeah, closes the image and leaves that annotation mode. And then it's also keeping track of the bounding box individually in the bottom left. So I think there's a lot of interesting things here. So I'm going to start to clean up a little bit, remove things that I don't like, and then also take the things that it did give me and run with it. Let's start to remove, first off, let's remove the instructions. Also remove the export button and the image annotation title. We'll start with that and then see how it does. Usually there's a balance between how many different parts of the UI that you want to edit in a single prompt. I find that you can generally it generally starts to hallucinate into the wrong areas when you start to get to around four to five different elements at the same time. And then another thing I noticed too is that you have to use pretty consistent language. And so keeping track of the names that you give for different elements that you're referring to, try and be as consistent as you can, because that's how the AI will know what you're referring to. So it did all those perfectly well, one-shotted that. So now I want to go into a bit of the segment experience in in the bottom bar, right? Because our original design here is that we have this segment mode that we're toggling into. So what I'll do is I'll start to define different modes. So I'm going to say after uploading an image, show a bar at the bottom of the screen with the button segment in the left side. Um, when clicking segment, it should go into segment mode where I can then start drawing bounding boxes. Very intentionally, I'm using the term segment mode. I'm again back to the earlier point. I'm trying to establish a shared language with the AI so that I can start to refer back to what I'm calling segment mode for future prompts. We'll see how this does. I reckon it's probably not going to get the perfect layout that I have mocked up here. Again, the purpose of this tool is to more show the larger functionality of the crosshairs, drawing bounding boxes dynamically, and what that would look like. And then we can start to draw the parallels between this interaction and the actual final mockup and the specific layout that you would have in Figma.
Cedric, do you have any special settings on V0? The question behind the question is, if you're trying to tightly couple design and engineering, I imagine that the front-end engineering or back-end engineering team has certain either linters or preferences as to how to manage state, how to structure the code. Are there ways to start to embed that natively in V0 so that when the code is generated, it's ready to go?
Yeah, definitely. There's a section in the V0 projects where if you go into a project of yours, you can actually go into the settings here and actually there's a tab called knowledge. So they have project instructions and sources. Sources, you can upload shared assets. So if you have images or logos or icon sets that you want to use and keep consistent, you can upload this here and refer to it there. For project instructions, you can specifically tell like what tools or frameworks you want the code base to run on. And so that way you're tailoring it specifically to your code base's stack.
Makes sense.
Great. Hey, actually did pretty well. So we've got this segment button at the bottom left. We're now in a segment mode. and we're going to start drawing some bounding boxes again. It's starting to come together. So I think this is starting to feel pretty good. I think I want to add a couple more interactions in actually. I'm going to start to give it some interaction logic. So first off, I'm going to do a bit of styling because the designer in me does not like this red color and the sharp corners. So I'm going to do some styling prompts where I'm going to say make the bounding boxes white and add a 4-pixel corner radius. And then I'm also going to talk about the segment button, remove the logo from the segment button. And then, yeah, so I think let's give it these two styling problems. And then after this, I'm going to start to give it some interactions where I'm going to start to link some hover interactions together, where if I'm hovering over one bounding box, it reduces the opacity for the surrounding bounding boxes. And I can even start to type this up now while it's working. So I'll say when hovering over a bounding box, make every other bounding box fade to an opacity of 0.2. And you'll see I'm trying to use the language of CSS and where I'm referring to corner radiuses, I'm referring to opacities and the way that they measure opacity on a 0 to 1 scale. So we got these styling changes in. Now let's run the hover effects. And I think once we get to that point, I think it'll be in a good state where I can start to show my engineers and then have them implement it into Cursor or have them implement it into the code base.
And so we've almost exclusively been working in preview mode here. Do you at all go into the code and inspect it or make sure that it wasn't hallucinating or make sure that there's no unintended interaction experiences?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are times where I find that maybe some part of so sometimes I think like for these canvases actually it draws new elements in the wrong parts of the DOM, and I have to go into the code base and actually see where it's drawing it directly. And so you can go in, you can see exactly what it's doing here. It's a very simple page structure. You've got your image canvas and image upload. So I think these are the kind of two different states, right? After you get into upload, it then goes into canvas mode. And here you can start to see, and I'll talk a little bit about what the process is for what my engineers look for when they're starting to convert these V0 prototypes into the code base itself. So just looking back at the prototype, there you go. It nailed the hover interaction. So now when I hover over a specific bounding box, it will deselect, it will reduce the opacity of the remaining bounding boxes. This is looking great. I'm going to say, let's start to show this to our engineers. So now they can start to play around with it, test for different edge cases, and really start to build some literacy on the prototype itself. And so now we have this shared language and this shared prototype for us to refine any parts of the design. So when I'm handing this off, there are a few things that my engineering counterparts will be looking for. And specifically, I'm giving them a link to this V0 prototype, and then I'm also giving them a link to my Figma mocks. And I'm giving them the same preface that I gave you all that, hey, Figma is representing the high fidelity. This should be like the one-to-one visual style. And then V0 should act as the way to understand the interaction behind the design. And so what they're going to be looking for is various components that they can start to pull out and bring into their code base. And they'll also be looking for things like what to store in state versus store. And so you might have constants like this where, because this is like a standalone application, they're storing everything in state, but there might be some more global constants that need to be referred to across different parts of the application. So things like the image that you upload, or yeah, maybe even like the state of dragging. Um, so these things, and then yeah, down here, they have the bounding box coordinates. So this is definitely something that we would want to start to pull out and actually reference across the app. So as the engineers start to work on this, they'll come back to me and say, "Hey, we're pretty much ready. Can you put the final polished touches on it?" And this is the last phase of the process where I get to then switch over to Cursor. So here I have Cursor pulled up, and I have our code base pulled up. For the purposes of this demo, I extracted a kind of snippet of our code base. And so I had this running locally on a branch of my own. Um, it's running right here. So this is localhost 3000. We are running this live. I can type things. I can I can create an image set and upload images. But let's see what the engineer handed to me. So I go here. I'm able to upload an image. Great. I'm able to preview it. Wonderful. Um, and so I'm able to even draw bounding boxes, and it's got labels on them. So this is looking really good. We have the same hover interaction, and we even have a bit more refined sidebar where we're capturing these different points as well as the coordinates for them. Um, Now, I think really a lot of the major functionality is there. It's baked in properly. I'm going to do some final cleanup because I got to uphold design and our visual craft. So there's small things like um, the border radius is too sharp. It's not matching the canvas here. Um, and I think I want to start to clean that up. Historically, if you're a designer, you have to go back to your front-end engineer and you have to say, hey, these are the visual design bugs I need you to clean up. And this has been, for as long as we've been developing software, the process that we've had to go back to. And it can be very tedious doing that back and forth dance where you're trying to break down very specifically what is the exact like corner radius to look for. You have to like annotate screenshots. And really almost sit down with your front-end engineer to get that over the finish line if you truly want a one-to-one implementation of your design. But now with Cursor, you can actually do that yourself. I have the corresponding file upload opened here. And so I'm just going to start to prompt it a bit. So I'm going to start to make some quick visual edits. I want to add a 16 corner radius to the sidebar and add a right margin of 8 pixels. So what this is going to do, you're going to see it's going to start to read through this specific code base. As you can see, I've added context to this prompt, so it's only going to be focusing on the image dialog file. And so now if we go over here, we see the changes just updated. So now we've got a bit of space and we've got some matching corner radiuses. This is starting to look better. Now, if I wanted to do some functional edits, I can also do that too. It's not just styling. So I can even go in and I can start to say, I want you to remove the point coordinates from the bounding box list items because I think it looks a little messy. I think I don't like how much noise there is. And so I'll do that and we'll let it run through the same document and start to make some changes here. I can even look back at where the diffs are. You can see that the changes that were just made, where they added the style border radius 16, margin right 8. And so now we can see it just removed this line where it's showing the actual breakdown of the coordinates themselves. And as we go back to localhost, now we see it's updated. So it's a bit cleaner. We still have this hover interaction to know which point is referring to which bounding box here. And we can still copy and delete any of these.
Cedric, we got a question in the chat. In terms of the handoff between design and engineering, is the implication that you're taking the V0 prototype and you're handing snippets of the code off to the engineer or giving access to the V0 platform to the engineer? And then in this sort of reverse handoff, for you to take one last look, it seems like you're actually in the code base and playing around with both the code base and the front end.
Yeah. that's a great question. For the handoff, when I'm giving the V0 handoff to my engineers, what I'll do is I'll share, first off, I'll actually deploy a production version um, of this application so that my teammates can test this out on the full screen themselves. But then I'll also give them access to this project where they can see the same preview and see the same code view. And so they can go and actually grab the whatever components or constants they need themselves. So right now it's building it, it's launching it. I'm sure this will take a bit of time, but I'll share this out with everyone actually at the end of this call. Because you can even play around with it yourself, which is one of the really nice things is that it goes from zero code to deployed application in a matter of minutes.
And do you ever go back and forth on the V0 itself? Is there versioning on the V0 natively?
Yes, there is. So in the chat here, you can actually see every single time I give it a prompt, it creates a new version and tracks it. So let's say it made a change that I didn't like. I can actually go back and I can view, okay, what did version 3 look like? This was right after I gave it the instruction to remove the instructions, export button, and image annotation title. Maybe I actually want some of those still. So I'll go back to viewing and then I can go into the prototype, play through it again, and I can start to see, all right, what is it still holding on to? So this is right after it removed them. So actually, maybe I want to go to version 2 and see what that looks like. Okay, so here I have the instructions again. I've got the export button, right? So from this, if I like this and I've confirmed that this is the version that I want to work off of, I can hit restore. And what that's going to do is it's going to create, essentially it's going to update the latest version to now reference back to version 2. And so from here, as I start prompting, it'll make changes based off of that older version. And I can bounce around this way. What's really useful about this is I can start to explore different vectors of changes. So if I'm trying to achieve a certain goal, and I try one approach and it's not working, I can always go back 2, 3, 4 versions, however much I want, to whatever checkpoint, the last checkpoint where the app was like properly functioning and up to my design spec. Sweet. So I just added here, let's see. So I just added here, we have our bounding boxes, and now I'm able to add one last bit of logic because I want to actually start to differentiate some of these points. So I want to do some dynamic numbering to these labels. Here again, we're starting to integrate logic, and you'll see that it goes far beyond just styling changes. So now we have this point reference, and it's capturing an index of the number of bounding boxes on the canvas, and then it's adding 1 to that index count. And so what you'll see here is that now on the side, we've got point 1, 2, 3, etc. But we don't have the points on the actual bounding box labels themselves. So I'm going to say, do the same numbering for the labels on the bounding boxes. And so all this time, you can really read through as Cursor breaks down what it's looking at, which file it's writing to, and how it's thinking about the changes that you've asked it to make. I think this is like good practice. For the purpose of the demo, I'm moving quickly and I'm not reading through the descriptions, but typically I would take the time to read through and understand how it's thinking, so that I'm making sure that it's thinking about the problems and the changes correctly. Because sometimes it can hallucinate and make changes that are across many different files, maybe the wrong files, and you have to be able to catch those. Great. So now it has the corresponding numbering for these point labels. And as I create more points, it continues to dynamically add that numbering. Great. So I'm gonna call it here. This is, as you can see, from the full stack, I'm able to now implement the kind of last mile of changes where I'm able to do styling changes, any logic, and make any dynamic changes that I find the feature needs. And so I can upload this PR. Um, what I'll do is I'll go over here. I can stage these files. I'll look through and make sure that like the proper changes have been made and that it's not making changes in the wrong parts of the code base. Assuming this looks good, I can start to stage these and then write a commit message in Git. Um, of course, this doesn't mean that I'm just getting blind uh, approved PRs. We still go through the process of I show this, I get approval from my engineers, and they'll look through my code, make sure that it's hitting our quality standards and security standards. Um, we still have those checks and balances in place. But now I'm able to actually contribute and add PRs to our code base directly, which is something that I've never been able to do as a designer before. Um, and it really is an empowering thing where I can now ensure that my designs are fully implemented one-to-one. It's a closed loop system that I think it's an amount of control that I've never been able to experience as a designer.
We got another question in the chat about the handoff between designers and engineers. Are your engineers now also moving up the stack and doing more design work? Do any of them spend time in V0? And do you view that trade-off as linear um, or I guess non-linear?
Yeah, I think there hasn't been as much reverse going back up the stack. I think but I don't see a reason why it can't be that way. I think where there's time and where there's interest and the skills to be learned, I think both directions can happen where designers can start to get more into the code and contributing more directly there. But engineers can also start to express their ideas and come up with prototypes faster using tools like V0 as well. I think it's more a matter of resourcing, time, and interest really from the individual.
Yeah, and I imagine that the types of skills that are now in vogue in the design engineering community are slightly different than they were even 3 to 5 years ago. How do you see that sort of core skill set shifting?
Definitely. I think in the past, if you wanted to be a design engineer, this kind of middle ground hybrid, um, you would have to do the sweat work of writing code yourself and learning how to build apps from scratch, which I did this a lot in college and throughout a lot of my early career, where I was going to hackathons and using that as a kind of playground space to try out new frameworks, new tools, and just dive into it for 24, 48 hours, and create kind of some end-to-end apps where I can test out these different libraries. Um, and that was the way that where I could build literacy from coding, and I can start to carry that into my job. Now with these tools like V0 and Lovable and Cursor, um, the I find the barrier to entry is so much lower. And so really what it becomes is how well can you articulate your thoughts and ideas and changes to the AI? And so as I mentioned in the past, I was using shared language and some of the technical terminology around like opacity, corner radius, speaking the language of CSS front-end code, or even if you're using a specific library. So we use ShadCN, we use Tailwind. So I might go into the ShadCN documentation and I'll look at what their different components lists are. And I'll use the specific terminology they use for a toast or a tooltip. Um, and I'll refer to the different preset classes that they have, and use that one-to-one language so that I'm reducing the amount of possibility for error or misinterpretation with the AI. But really, that skill just becomes reading documentation and being able to speak the language rather than having to actually write the code yourself. And that is still a large step function change where now I just have to be able to articulate these thoughts clearly.
That makes sense. And it seems like you built a lot of this 0 to 1 muscle after leaving Coinbase, after leaving the large company. But we have a lot of folks on the call who work at larger and more skilled companies. How do you recommend that they take either small steps or even larger steps to start to better incorporate these sort of rapid prototyping themes into their day-to-day.
Yeah, definitely. I feel the struggle and kind of the hesitance to maybe lean into these tools, especially when you're at a larger company where there's a much more mature and established code base. You may not have direct access to the code base itself. But I think the very first area where I would recommend people start to dive in is just prototyping. There's so much talk in the design world around like prototyping your ideas, um, going straight to prototyping because that's like the strongest way to storytell and get buy-in from other stakeholders. If they can actually play around with it and feel it, it's going to be a much stronger experience than if they're seeing these static screens and you kind of have to do some hand waving to explain what the interaction will be like. So, historically, there have been, of course, a growth in prototyping tools. You've got your origamis, your framers, now you have Rive, all these really fascinating tools. And so this is, think of it as another tool in your arsenal for prototyping. So you don't have to integrate into your existing code base. You don't have to meet all those standards, but you can use these tools to create these one-off prototypes and really wow your stakeholders. And as you can see how quick it is, this can take sometimes even quicker than trying to prototype this out in Figma. I've so many times I've created massive Figma prototypes where I've got huge webs of connecting arrows, trying to get every permutation of a component to actually work in tandem with each other. Um, the amount of time it takes to create that can literally be almost like days. And with V0, with these prototyping tools, you can literally do these things in a matter of hours. So I think it's really worth just trying to create a personal account, try to take some small snippet of an interaction that you're interested in prototyping, something that you find like maybe Figma can't do right now, or maybe it's something that you could prototype out in Figma, but it would take you a long time. These are the certain types of prototypes that would be really well fitted for V0 and lovable in those tools.
Awesome. And we had another question in the chat. I imagine a lot of the components that V0 generates are often not composable or not structured in a way that you can reuse them effectively. Do you have any suggestions for recognizing that and starting to create discipline in the generation flow so that the types of components you generate can be reused or better aligned with your engineering discipline?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that I haven't personally had a chance to get into that level of guidance for my projects. And I think like I was showing prior, there are these project levels where you can start to give some of this high level knowledge and framework usage, but I haven't seen yet an ability to do specific component level guidance. I think you have things like, yeah, integrations, environment variables, but nothing quite at that granular level yet. I think one thing I have thought about doing in the past. I haven't actually done it yet, so I think you all should try it and let me know how it goes. But you can take example components from your code base and you can put that into Claude Code or even O3. I find O3 does a good job of using reasoning to do code style matching. And so you could say, hey, take the structure of this component and make sure the rest of this code base is aligned with that structure. And so I can just go into my prototype, copy one of these files, and then paste it into ChatGPT and run that. Um, I think it can actually pick up on some of those styling differences, try to percolate it through your V0 prototype.
Awesome. And I know we've mostly talked today about um, applying AI or AI techniques in your traditional design workflow. Maybe just for the last few minutes here, I want to just switch gears and talk a little bit about thinking about designing software and specifics around UI UX related to AI systems. I imagine AI systems are novel, they're non-deterministic, there's image output, there's text output, there's video output, and they tend to hallucinate. Are there are there any sort of first principles that you consistently look to as you think about um, design decisions for AI native products or AI native tools?
Yeah, definitely. I think ultimately when creating these when designing for AI tools, what makes it feel really magical is when it feels like you're talking to another person. And when you're talking to another person, they're able to just subconsciously pick up on all these context cues, historical knowledge about the topic that you're discussing, um, the way that you're expressing your instructions or your sentences, um, and it's able to put all these pieces together and output like kind of the perfect response. So when an AI is able to do that at the same efficacy, that's where you start to get those magic moments and those wow moments. And so I think trying to reduce trying to minimize the amount of hand holding that a user has to do for when interacting with these agents is I think a principle I try to remind myself because especially as we're starting to get into more complicated tasks that we're trying to give these that they're trying to give AI, it's tempting to give it more structure, choosing how to orient its answers and whatnot, or even giving it like large verbose descriptions. If we can keep those as minimal as possible, the magic in interacting with AI, in my opinion, is when you're able to just get to a point where whatever you're thinking, it just gets it. And you have to do the minimal amount of communication to actually get the job done. I think that's the higher level principle that we should be striving for.
And to that point, are there any dark patterns that you sometimes see with AI native products that you're like, oh gosh, if they'd changed their design in this way, it would have been a lot more emotionally or physically appealing as an end user?
Yeah, definitely. I think, let's see, dark patterns that I've seen. I think there are times where the AI starts to, yeah, kind of like hallucinate and run off in the wrong directions. Um, and I think it can be a little jarring seeing that happen all at once. And so, I think that the ability to interject and stop a train of thought before it derails too much is something that I think there could be a better experience around that, where instead of having to constantly stare at this stream of consciousness and thought, you could almost it starts to get into a bit of a meta level where you could maybe have other AI agents that are looking out for these derailing moments. And you can have them flag it to you when it matters most. I think you can start to get into an interesting realm there. But having the stress of having to watch your AI mess up it can be a bit of a poor experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. I also imagine as we move into a world with more agents and you're running your codex agents and your cursor agents and your relevance AI agents, I guess, we're going to be multitasking in ways that we never have before, almost like we're going to be managers in our own right. And so what you're describing around thinking through design patterns around stopping and interjecting agents or managing them or even dashboard level views of progress will be really important. I think that's an unanswered question, I imagine, in the AI design community.
Definitely. I think there's actually I could see a very real world where you have this layer um, agent management dashboards where as you have all these different companies and services that are spinning up their own AI agents running tasks in the background, you can have 9, 10 different tasks going at once. And if it's all on different tabs of your browser or maybe in different desktop apps, it can be really hard to keep track of what's going on. And I could see where maybe an Apple or creates a central hub where you can actually keep track of all these agents. And it can become almost an API that these services plug into. And just like how you have the dynamic island, you have this like one central place where you can like very subtly keep track of the progress of these different tasks.
Is there anyone, either companies or Twitter accounts or books or just media that you follow and stay abreast of just to stay up to date with this intersection of design and engineering?
Yeah, definitely. One one person I like to follow is Tommy Gecko. He's a designer, posts on like Twitter, Instagram, stuff like that. But he does a lot of sharing out around the latest and greatest design tooling. But even in the design space, the latest like visual design trends too on like landing pages, product design, and where the industry is shifting. We're seeing the return of kind of a nuo skeuomorphism that is starting to land in a lot of these websites where you see really fine-grained attention to detail on shading and animation. And it's just almost like renaissance of going back to the old days of the first iPhone app icons and how everything was like mimicked after the real world. So we're starting to see that visual design trend. But then he also shares a lot about various tools. We've got Paper coming up. We've got, I think, many other Recraft is another one where that does like style transfer across image gen. Um, so they're really, I think he's a great resource to follow and learn just like what is the latest because things are moving so fast. And honestly, I'm still trying to keep in touch with what is the latest and greatest. Who knows? Maybe after this talk, V0 is maybe not the best tool anymore. But this is like a muscle that I think like anyone right now should be trying to build. It's just like a muscle for testing new things and just quickly trying out a little project, a mini project in a new tool, just to see how it does compared to other tools.
Awesome. Yeah, I completely agree. Cedric, thank you so much for taking the time to share your workflow with us. And thank you to the group for joining